So the point of view tonight is dedicating our show to the journey of constitutional reform. In the 92 constitution's life, there have been, I'll call it 2.5 attempts to try and improve it. Around 2010-ish, President Mills set up the Constitution Review Commission with Professor Fiajo, working with Raymond Atuguba and some very bright people. They produced a 1,000-page document. Well, when President Mills died, it looked like that effort also died, because even though there was a Constitution Review Implementation Committee, nothing really came out of that. We still have the document, though. The President Akufo-Addo administration tried in their second term, 2023-24, to do some sort of constitution review. It didn't really go far. We had the likes of Chairman Sabunsu leading that effort. One of President Mahame's first things he did when he was voted into office in 2024 was to appoint a 9 or 8 member committee chaired by Professor Henry Kwesi Prempeh. They've produced a 127-page report hinged on many things they've done. Tonight we'll be looking at the content of that report. What are the key proposals for reform in that work? How different is their terms of reference from the 2 previous efforts? So H. Kwesi Prempeh is my guest and he's here in studio. Prof, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Bernard.
I've always said that you had a lot of hair until you took this job. It's almost all gone. And I know we'll blame the president for this. We also have Dr. Nimoy Thompson. First time I heard of him, he was described as an Africanomist. He's come a bit far.
That's
These
over
days,
20 years ago.
He's a special advisor to the president on a number of things, but critically, he's the chairperson of the NDPC, an organization he used to be DG of. He's a development economist. He's very concerned about development. We've brought him here to help us think through some of the developmental sides of this constitutional review effort, particularly because the theme is to move our democracy from electoral to developmental. Doc, it's good to have you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
We have Oliver Barker Vormawor, very interesting guy, convener of Fix the Country, but also one of the leading minds at Democracy Hub. Interestingly, he worked under Raymond Atuguba, part of the young lawyers at the time, who wrote that copious 1,000-page report that has gathered dust, but hopefully will be revived by this work. He's here to speak to us on the process of constitution review and its complexity. Oliver, good to have you.
Happy to be here.
Wonderful. So the 127-page report is great. We have summarized about 55 key proposals. Very simplistic summary. So I'm going to run through them so we are on the same page. I know that our summary may not necessarily capture the full essence, but at least it's good for all of us to know. So we group the summaries under 5 main rubrics. So under the executive and the presidency, we notice about 9 key proposals. Number 1, maintain the 2-term limit for the president. 2, extend the presidential term from 4 to 5 years. Very controversial. 3, lower the minimum age for presidential candidates from 40 to 30. 4, subject presidential salaries and benefits to taxation. 5, limit post-office immunity and allow civil and criminal proceedings within defined periods. This is for presidents. 6, restrict the appointment of ministers from parliament. 7, cap the total number of ministers and require parliamentary justification for excess appointments. 8, mandate removal of a minister upon parliamentary censure. And 9, clarify presidential succession and post-election transition limits. So these are the brief highlights of the proposals under the executive. Under parliament and representative democracy, again, we summarize about 9. Cap the size of parliament at the current level. Don't forget, when we started, it was 200, 230, 275. It may become 500. So these guys want us to cap it. 2, study and consider proportional representation to improve inclusion. Strengthen internal parliamentary independence from party control. That's 3. Allow dual citizens by birth to contest parliamentary elections. 5, bar public officers from partisan politics without resignation and cooling off. 6, extend parliamentary terms to 5 years and align elections with presidential polls. And 7, guarantee public participation in lawmaking. There's also formalizing private members' bill, which the Okwe Parliament began, and required timelines for subsidiary legislation. Now, under political parties and elections, proposals include create an independent regulator for political parties and campaigns, control campaign spending and election periods 3, mandate disclosure and audit of party finances. 4, establish a democracy fund for party development. 5, strengthen internal party democracy. Then we come to electoral commission and independent bodies. There are about 4 proposals there that we picked out. Reconstitute the EC to a leaner full-time structure. 2, introduce merit-based and transparent appointment process for the electoral commission chairpersons. 3, set fixed non-renewable terms for commissioners. Very interesting. And then 4, clarify removal procedures to protect independence. Now, under the National Development and Public Finance rubric, Nimoy Thompson, anchor national development planning constitutionally. 2, align budgets and legislation with the National Development Plan. 3, create an independent fiscal council. 4, introduce debt ceilings and fiscal discipline rules. 5, rationalize tax exemptions. And 6, strengthen oversight of state-owned enterprises through a constitutional body. There are more recommendations. Just pick out 5. There are more details in the full report. Let me do 2 more. Lands and natural resources. Clarify fiduciary management of public and stool lands. Protect reversionary rights of original landowners. Reversionary rights of original landowners. 3, ensure parliamentary ratification of national resource agreements. 4, increase revenue allocation to affected communities. 5, strengthen environmental protection, including recognition of ecocide risks. Then there's also a whole bunch of things under accountability and anti-corruption. Let me mention a few. Reform the Council of State to enhance independence and effectiveness. Take note, they didn't say scrap, they say reform. 2, strengthen judicial appointment, tenure and removal process. 3, limit administrative powers of the CJ. 4, establish a constitutional anti-corruption and ethics commission. And then there's also public service and governance, under which there are 4, reduce fragmentation of public services, protect public officers from political interference, introduce merit-based recruitment and fixed tenure for senior officials, and strengthen asset declaration and sanctions for unexplained wealth. Then there's a couple more on rights, inclusion, and social justice. Decentralization, let me do those 2. On rights, expand protection for women, children, persons with disability, and minorities. 2, abolish the death penalty. 3, recognize rights to food, housing, health, and privacy. 4, address discrimination against dual citizens and foreign spouses. Now, on local governance and decentralization, 4 recommendations we picked out. Create an independent devolution commission, so more commissions. Deepen political and fiscal decentralization. Review the election and tenure of metropolitan, municipal, and district chief executives. And 4, strengthen local revenue generation and accountability. Finally, on security and stability, create independent oversight for security services, clarify civilian control and deployment rules, and strengthen tenure protection for security leadership. Then there's also something called a living constitution. Introduce mechanisms for easier constitutional amendment through popular initiative. We'll comment on this later. And address something called constitutional rigidity and obsolete provisions. We'll deal with that. So now let's talk to my guests. Gentlemen, you're welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So what is the difference between a committee and a commission that he worked for? Prof, I think that's a question I'll ask you, because today we heard the Minister of Education say that there will be no white paper. And people are like, why won't there be a white paper? I guess that's because of the difference you're about to explain, correct?
Actually, well, the Constitution actually says that committee and commission, the terms are used interchangeably.
Is it?
But I think the difference between ours and what I would call CRC1, which was a commission, was that we were not set up pursuant to a particular instrument.
Okay.
Right? The CRC1 was set up pursuant to an instrument, a CI, that created that kind of commission. But I think that in the intervening period, remember that there was this lawsuit that was brought by Professor Asari post-CRC report during the CRC implementation stage. And that was to challenge the power of the president to proceed with the creation of this body. And the Supreme Court says, look, this is advisory work. This is preparatory work. The president is entitled to set up a committee of this kind to advise him on constitutional reform, and that to the extent that that's really the nature of the task, the president is free to do that. And so I think since then the idea is, I don't know the mind of the presidency, but I think that they thought, well, that also means that we can do this even without a CI or without a particular instrument. And so they proceeded, I think, on the authority of that Supreme Court case to just set us up this way. Does it have implications for whether you do a white paper or not? Probably. I don't know why. I don't know if that explains why there is no white paper. But typically the white paper has been associated with a commission or committee of inquiry that is established pursuant to a particular instrument. And then follows the procedures in the Constitution, the relevant chapter on commissions of inquiry, which sets out, the process when you submit your report, what it means, white paper and all of that. Because we were not set up pursuant to that process, I suppose that really obviates the need for a white paper, but I'm not too sure about that.
I'll come back to what the president can do with what you've done. Your terms of reference, I have 4 here. Review the reports and other inputs, and other outputs of CRC1 and CRC or CRIC, which is the Implementation Committee, and CRC2 or CRCC. Identify and address gaps and challenges with the implementation of the work done by these previous aforementioned bodies. 3, engage the public and stakeholders to solicit their views and proposals for amendment. That's the meat. And then 4, make, quote, actionable recommendations for amendments to the Constitution that would enhance democratic governance and make for a more inclusive, effective, and forward-looking national governance framework. What is your understanding of actionable recommendation? Does that, in a sense, mean that something that he would have to agree to? I mean, what's your understanding of that term?
Actionable. I think it's recommendations with a roadmap, with a way forward that enables them to act on it. Don't give us something vague. Be very clear and specific. If it's prescriptive, fine, but give us a pathway how we actually proceed to do this. I think part of what the problem that CRC1 had encountered, and maybe Oliver would speak to that as well, is that at some point, technically, processing the outputs of that commission became a problem, right? It's voluminous work, it's a lot of good work, but then there was a technical constraint in terms of processing it. And so that became a hitch. And part of what we thought our remit was, well, do the content stuff, all the substantive stuff, but also give us a way forward. How do we overcome this lingering problem of having gone through all of this and having come up with a bunch of ideas? How do we move it forward? How can we act on it? And so I think actionable both in terms of content, the substantive content, but also in terms of the process, the procedure. How do we take this from here into law and make it come into fruition? That's how
Oliver,
I understood it.
Do you agree when Haruna Idrisu says there will be no white paper? Is he interpreting this well? And second point there, is it better that there will be no white paper?
So it's not a question of whether I agree with him. I think it's more that there's no constitutional requirement that there should be a white paper.
Good.
That the government can choose to react to the reports. And in this case, they don't even need to call it a white paper, because if you do call it a white paper, we have to question what the legal effect of it is, because we know what the legal effect of a white paper based on the Constitution is. So it can be a government response to that. And that response can very well be said to have been delivered by the president when he then met them and said this is his views. He thought that some of them were revolutionary in his view. It's a government's response to it. Maybe it's not itemized individually. But we should also not forget that the government can respond to this also through Parliament, right? So his representatives in the Assembly can then decide to state government position. The party itself can also have a position in terms of this more holistically. So yes, there's no constitutional requirement for a white paper to be issued per se. I know that some people have also expressed the view that they actually want to hear government's view on this. I take a different position on it. I think that the government is better served by opening up the debates and opening up the different parties to be involved in the process. Remember that when it came to the CRC1, a lot of the criticism that attended the process was that the government had issued a white paper, which people felt that it took out the steam out of the entire report. So to this day, a lot of people still don't believe or trust Mahama on the process.
Yeah.
That, you were in the first instance, you issued this white paper that kind of cooled tempers. So perhaps politically, the better play here is to say, like, listen, let's just push this through the political process and see how people react to it.
And based on what you've seen the committee do and your experience from the previous, commission, are these more actionable? Because this is just 127 pages. You guys did 1,000 pages. I haven't still finished reading that. So, pragmatically, do you feel like this is more actionable because they're more concise? I was able to run through majority of them in less than 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So is it more concise? Is it more clinical?
I think that they are actually in the same position.
Okay.
Perhaps in terms of the load of what the CRC1 did, because remember, a lot of these recommendations are focused on the constitutional level only. CRC1 expanded its mandate to recommend statutory and administrative actions. Okay, all of those could have been actioned upon if you wanted to. And in fact, a lot of the recommendations that were made, the vast majority of them, were statutory and administrative, that we didn't even need to amend the constitution to do them. We just didn't act on them. But on the constitutional level, I think that it's not even the fact that what we have, it's, a more abridged version or more narrower, but it's that this committee has found the key to the problem that was in the first instance. And the problem was that the CRC1 had made a number of recommendations that touched the entrenched provisions of the Constitution. I think about 53 of them. Now, the question then that arose was whether or not we're going to put 53 questions to the Ghanaian voter to vote on. How do we do it? Do you have a long list that you come and write like a mock exam or WASI? Or whether or not we do individualized referendums? So that was a big problem. And I think what never really happened, even in terms of the implementation process, is that we didn't really have a lot of brain power to think through how do we solve that problem.
Okay.
And when it came to CRCC, they also focused on the content and still left that process question aside. So this is the first time that there's a solution proposed as the way to deal with that. And the solution that has been proposed with this is, starting with chapter 25 of the Constitution, which deals with how do you amend the Constitution. Now, the Constitution Repair Committee is saying that to avoid that problem that we had in the first instance, let us first amend how we amend the Constitution. And to
Let's amend how we amend the Constitution.
Yes. So that the only question that is going to go to the Ghanaian voter is, do you agree with us to amend how we amend that part of the Constitution? So the bulk or the majority of the recommendations, or essentially 99% of them, are going to then go through Parliament and end in Parliament.
Okay.
And they don't all have to be repetitively sent to referendum.
Let me get you right.
Yeah.
If Kwesi Prempeh's committee says, let's make it easier to amend the Constitution, and we agree to that as a country through referendum, then whatever amendment we want to do can go through a parliamentary process without a referendum.
I don't necessarily think that they are making it easier to amend the Constitution. What they have done is that Ghanaian voters will retain the referendum option on a limited set of questions. Whether we should change the nature of our political system, for instance. Whether or not we have a presidential, the number of terms the president can serve, those they identify to be the core structure of what makes the Ghanaian democracy. Okay. But the vast majority of questions as to whether or not, at what age a president should be appointed, what age the president should retire, who can compose and sit in the Council of State, all those minutiae, let us then create a second tier, which is called a semi-entrenched. And we drop all of them that were previously entrenched that would have gone to the Ghanaian voter into that second column. And for that, when it goes to Parliament, you need 75% majority of Parliament to change it. But what was already 66, 2/3 majority of Parliament remains as it is. So that's where they have solved that question that everybody didn't know how to do it. In fact, before they were, I think the day after the committee was appointed, we had held the case for a new constitution, where we were saying that everybody is focused about the content, But the bigger challenge is how do we in fact do this? And our proposal was that we need to have a new constitution where you bundle up all these issues and present one constitution to the Ghanaian voter.
Wow.
So what they have proposed then is a workaround, in fact, of the technicality or the technical difficulty of how you put these questions to the
So
Ghanaian
in a
voter.
sense, Doc, this may be the most important recommendation of
I think it is. I think it's the least focused upon, but I think it's the most, it unblocks, in fact, some of the structural
because
problems we have.
failing to do that, all these discussions about, because I'm not even sure how you will present the question,
Yes.
what format it will be, whether it will be an individual election. It will be very complicated if you don't amend the process of amendment.
Absolutely.
So is he interpreting what you are doing correctly?
No, absolutely. He got it just spot on. I mean, and that for us was the real challenge.
Okay.
You know, because you do all of this work and then you hit this roadblock. And the truth of the matter is that at the founding, 1992, we over-entrenched, right? And we may have over-entrenched for good reason.
All right.
Right, because you do not want, usually you are worried about a transient majority or some regime coming opportunistically to just change things. So because of our own experience, we may have been a bit paranoid. And so we over-entrenched the Constitution. So entire chapters like the chapter on the executive, where Nimoy Thompson's commission resides, that whole chapter is entrenched. And yet when you go into that chapter, you ask yourself, why
on earth are you entrenching how
Why
NDPC
must
should
we
work?
go to a referendum in order to change something about how the NDPC works, for example, or the composition of the National Security Council, or any one of these things? Then, so we said, look, let's really identify the key pillars of this democracy that we can consider sacrosanct or some sacred cows, and then isolate those ones and say, look, these are the only ones we want to keep as entrenched. Anybody who wants to touch these ones must go to a referendum. Beyond that, everything that is currently entrenched, as Oliver said, we put into a different category called the semi-entrenched category. But what we do is that we maintain the 75% threshold that it would have required to change it in a referendum. We just change the forum from a referendum to parliament. But the 75% threshold holds, which means you have to have a very high national consensus, cross-party participation to be able to touch it. So that's what we propose. And therefore, that means that in terms of the sequencing of the reforms, we go with this first and ask Ghanaians, look, this is what we've come up with. But in order to be able to process this, we need to ask you to agree that you would only keep X, A, B, C, D, E, F, G as the entrenched clauses. We will identify them, 2-term limits, you have a right to go to court, form political parties, multi-party democracy. Those features of our current system that we consider definitional of our democracy, we keep them entrenched.
Everything else will be semi-entrenched.
There's already a category of non-entrenched at all, which means 2/3. We keep that at 2/3. But whatever else was previously referendum now steps down to a parliamentary vote, but 75%, so that it does. You don't degrade.
Okay. Doc, you and I didn't study law. What they are saying, does it make sense?
Pretty much, actually. But perhaps I should step back a little bit. When the CRIG was set up at the time, I was actually a commissioner. I was a commissioner at the time on the PV of Ben. And it's interesting to look back and reflect on the politics that actually went on behind the scenes in terms of the preparation of the white paper. We weren't directly involved, but we heard quite a bit, contentious and all that. And so
Who wrote
they
it?
had to. I won't mention their names.
It was so disappointing to read. After such hard work, somebody just sat somewhere and dismissed. I was like, this doesn't make any sense.
Right. And
So you were there.
As commission, we also had issues with the white paper. So I have an old document where there's a matrix of the original recommendations, what the white paper had to say, and what we thought should be done. Where we thought the original recommendations, some of them were redundant and so forth and so on. So we went through that whole process. And I'm glad that at least we've learned from it with an old hand, Oliver being part of the original process. So he has all these insights. So I'm okay that we've actually come this far in terms of providing the space for us to be able to, especially the three categories that they listed. So the the non-entrenched, the semi-entrenched, and then the entrenched. I think it's
Makes
perfect.
sense.
Yeah,
So
what
once
I'm not clear about would be the criteria for setting which one would be semi-entrenched
Sure,
and that kind of
absolutely.
thing. But I'm
Did
sure
you
it's an
propose?
operational issue.
Did you make that criteria clear?
Yes, and I think we basically it's a very we define it as, you know, what are these, what we considered from the committee's point of view, what are the core structural, you know, features upon which our democracy sits, right? So these are for us the foundational things, the pillars. If we say that we have a multi-party democracy, and that's what we have elected to practice, then the right to form political parties, the prohibition against one-party state, term limits, you know, access to
They
courts,
must be there.
the judicial
They
independence.
should not be
and that's
touched.
Absolutely. So those are sacrosanct. And we're saying that once we've preserved these ones, everything else that used to be entrenched, it was probably, you know, it didn't need to be there.
Like stuff like you can't prosecute the president after how many years?
There's a certain number of years.
Yeah, if you want to change the number of years, for
Yeah,
example.
that
right?
doesn't have to be entrenched.
Why do you
it
have
doesn't
to
threaten our
entrench
democracy.
that, right? If you want to change the election calendar,
It's not such a big issue.
why do you have to
Yeah.
entrench?
So 75% of
procedural,
parliament
right?
can do this.
Yes, and 75%.
Change the composition of the NDPC.
Of the NDPC. In fact, that's a big issue, right? Especially if you are thinking that you want to reorient the constitution from electoral democracy to developmental democracy. And one of the key pillars of this would be, you know, national development planning, NDPC, and it's entrenched.
That
You go
makes
there and say, will Ghanaians go to a referendum to change the composition of the NDPC?
They are looking for bread to eat. They don't even
Because
understand
there's also a minimum requirement for a referendum. At least 40% of registered voters must participate. So to even get that threshold,
Yeah.
before those who participate must then vote by 75%.
All right.
It's not easy. So it's costly, it's technically very cumbersome and almost impossible to get in some cases. So it makes our constitution too rigid. And so we may, if we're not careful, if we don't get over this issue, we may really be stuck.
All right.
With this
But
constitution.
speaking of NDPC and the points that he just made, maybe it's just as well. Maybe we have to reflect more on that. Because with respect to NDPC in particular, and you've looked at some of the recommendations made here, which are completely at variance. Not all, some of them are quite relevant. But there are substantial parts that are completely at variance with how the commission actually functions, how it's structured, and so forth and so on. It's not something you want to be able to do so easily. So there needs to be some threshold that makes it rigorous to make sure that you are in fact proposing reforms that advance the process and the outputs of the commission and do not set them back. And some of the
We'll look
recommendations
closely
here,
at
yeah.
that when we come back. The point of view tonight is live with 3 guests. We're looking at the efforts to reform our constitution. We've concluded on one thing. HKP's work is a lot more concise than previous efforts, but it also tries to free us from the shackles of an unreformable constitution. Agree to change the process of amendment. That will make life easier. When we come back, we'll look at some of the key proposals for amendment and how they sit. Stay with us.